Hey everyone, Ian with Young Adventurers Guild here. Today I want to talk about the what of minis. I am working on a why script for minis, but today I really want to get into the specifics of material and practicality for gaming miniatures. Now, I'm going to give you sort of a list of minis and how I've interacted and experienced them. There may be other materials out there, but this is as comprehensive as I can make it. We're going to start with pewter minis. Now, pewter minis are a kind of metal. They are often tin based on some kind of level. One of the cool things about pewter minis is that they have a very classic, epic fantasy sort of heroism to them. However, because nobody's really making pewter minis anymore, there certainly are industries, but they're just not as popular, and because they're just not as easy to work with. It has to be super glue and the bond isn't always perfect. They're just not produced as much anymore, so they're becoming harder and harder to find. They're a lot more of this classic image of Dungeons and Dragons that is kind of a bygone era. Now, one last thing to note about pewter minis is that when you paint them, you do have to take great care to protect them because it's very easy for the paint to scratch off of that material. Next, we have plastic minis. Now, plastic minis, one of the great things about these is that they come fully painted out of the box. I believe WizKids produces these miniatures, and they're relatively cheap. That's one of the nice things about them. I really don't care that this guy has lost an arm. At some point, I'm going to replace it with probably one of the other types of plastic I'll talk about, and that will be a fun project for me in the future. But for now, it's just kind of illustrating a few points. Clearly, it is already painted. I did not paint this mini. It comes with lots of variety. And again, they are pretty cheap. Now, one of the cool things about these guys is that you can buy them in mystery boxes. You get a set appropriate mini from Wizards of the Coast. One of their expansions often have these miniatures in boxes. I recommend it. If you have a couple bucks, pick one up, add it to your collection. But when it comes to the hobby, as far as being able to collect these minis, I don't recommend them as much unless you're getting something that is unpainted to do yourself, because there's plenty of other things that do come unpainted. I like them if you want just something fast. It's fun. Now, one of the cool things about plastic, and if you don't care too much about realism or a sort of being specific about Dungeons and Dragons, is that if you just get some plastic toys, you can pop any old plastic toys down on the battlefield. Maybe the T-Rex from Jurassic Park or Venom show up, and you can make them an appropriately scaled monster to your party. That's fine. Have fun with it. Next up, we have plastic minis. This one is from Reaper. Now, the nice thing about Reaper and the plastic that they use for their minis is that it is very flexible. It's quite durable to damage. I can twist the head on this guy. It's not going to pop off. They come in these blister packs, which are quite cheap, and you usually get between 1 and 5 minis, depending on, hey, look, 6 for $8. That's a great deal. You're getting these different scaled. They're appropriate to Dungeons and Dragons. They're lightweight, and they're just easy. They also take paint incredibly well, and it typically is fairly hard to scratch the paint off of them. You can, but again, you'll have to protect them in the same way that you would protect a Reaper mini. Now, one of the cool things about these minis is that they are very easy to modify. You can clip them almost with a pair of scissors. You could use clippers or whatever. So if you wanted the wings off of this guy, put it on something else, you could just as easily clip them off. And again, because they're so cheap, it's a very viable option to do that. Now, one thing to note about these minis and the plastic is that sometimes weapons or for example, this creature's wings might come in warped. They do warp with heat, and it is unfortunately part of the model line that you have to deal with that heat warping. Next up, Games Workshop Minis. Now, Games Workshop Minis are, in my opinion, they are the pinnacle of miniatures. They come in tons of options. Typically, you might get a torso for a character with different arms, maybe a different head, and you can keep these extra parts and put them on other minis, and it lets you make a lot of choices with your minis. Additionally, the sculpts are really high quality, so what you're getting is usually going to be very nice. As I mentioned, kit bashing. I made this guy just out of spare parts because it was fun. That's something that's awesome to do. These minis come on sprues. So you can see this sort of plastic parts to this guy. You do have to assemble them yourself. You have to use plastic glue, which is one of the big disadvantages of this. There's a few things that can go wrong during the assembly process, but if you're really interested in this as a hobby over simply collecting or just going straight to using them in a Dungeons and Dragons battlefield, I do recommend this. It's a ton of fun, and it can bring people together. One of the things to know about Warhammer Minis is that they often come in squads, and because you're buying them in a squad of usually 3 to 5, you're going to be paying extra for them. That's just the reality. Games Workshop is going to charge a lot for their minis. And in addition to that, when you buy a mini from Games Workshop, you are ultimately going to get what Games Workshop wants to present to you. They don't offer sort of generic fantasy minis, even though their universe has a sort of generic fantasy vibe. They're moving into more specific, oh, this is a Sigmar character. It's from the fantasy line, but it has all this iconography on it. So if you're going to convert them to something for generic Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to do a bit more work in terms of making them generic, unfortunately. But again, that's hobby. It's part of the fun. Next up, we're going to talk about resin minis. Now, resin is kind of a new industry. These resin models have grown in popularity as people realize they can get their own printer, they can buy designs online, and they can print them out to their heart's content. However, there is some issues when it comes to that. First of all, resin is a toxic substance. So when you are printing this out, you have to take great care to make sure that you do not touch the resin, you don't accidentally ingest any of it, and you really don't inhale any, because it will give you serious health problems. And the fact that we're allowing people to do this in their home, that's a concern. In addition, people think that all you need is you just need that printer. And unfortunately, there are a bunch of hidden costs when it comes to resin models. Now, printing resin models. So you have the printer, and then you need a UV light thing to solidify the excess resin on the outside. And then you need a washer to wash away all that extra resin. And they have to be washed in isopropyl alcohol. And it's all these extra things that you pile on top of just having a resin printer that kind of, in my opinion, makes this particular part of the hobby a little bit more difficult. In addition to which, continuing to pile things on, these minis are quite brittle. In contrast to the flexible plastic minis, these resin minis are extremely harsh. You can snap a part of it and it will just come off, break off, and who knows what's inside. If you ever have a hollow part of a mini that isn't cured and resin comes pouring out, that's a health hazard for you right there. So not great. That being said, resin minis have incredible detail on them. This spider, just absolutely beautiful. You have huge ranges of resin models that are really cool. And that's also kind of a failing, because whoever designs the model is putting in the work to make the model look really cool. So you also have your printer, you have your designer and your printer, which determine the quality of the model. You're not getting anything from sort of a regulated source that is able to look at all of these minis and say, ah, yes, this is the amount of quality that I want, or this is how I need to set it up. It's, oh my gosh, resin printing is so much fun, but it's also a huge challenge. Finally, they are difficult to work with for crafting. I'm sorry to say, I don't really like chopping up resin minis. I like purchasing damaged resin minis. Oh, misprints and failures. Yeah, so a resin printer can fail. And unfortunately, because it can fail, your mini can come out bad. And so sometimes you have chunks of mini that just didn't print or something went wrong. So yeah, you can actually have a failure for your printed mini that you maybe spent 20, 30 bucks on, and now it's just a broken piece. If you do fail that, hey, give it to me. I love putting together broken things, and it's just fun for me. Part of the hobby. So in conclusion, I love minis, but they are kind of impractical unless you're hosting games, usually at home, or are very precise with your selection. If you have a month to prepare, you can usually acquire a resin mini to have the monster for whatever upcoming fight, or if you have some kind of interaction that you want a set piece for, that's easy enough. You have to have that foreknowledge, and unless you're hosting at home, and like me, you have a huge wall of minis that you've been collecting for ages, it's going to be a lot harder to transport all of these minis everywhere. Now, wargamers often will have their army and they will transport them places, but again, usually they're dealing with this fairly lightweight plastic and lots of little pieces that they typically just throw into a box. And because there's maybe 100 models, they don't care too much about them getting scratched up. Ultimately, this is a great hobby. I love assembling and painting and displaying minis, and being able to put something down on the tabletop for a fight is such a pleasant feeling. The tangibility is really addictive. I think if you want to approach this as a hobby, if it's fun for you, do it. Just keep that in mind when you are going to play with minis. All right, everyone, that's it. Remember to like and subscribe, and if you like what you saw here, head on over to Patreon. I do have a Patreon now. I don't have listed tiers yet, but I'll work on it. If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons with me, I run Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons with me, I run D&D online. So you can always contract me to run with your friends. If you're in the Orange County area, hire me to run Dungeons and Dragons at your house, and I will bring my minis. Well, thank you. That's it. See you later, and good night, Mr. Cricket.